For me, I guess it began with a visit to Great Yarmouth College of Art, where I'd been a student in the early 1980s, and I'd revisited Great Yarmouth around 2010, 2009, and the art school building, the building I'd been a student at, was for sale, and I found that quite shocking, really, that the idea that you could have a qualification from a particular institution and then, 30 years down the road, that institution not only does the institution not exist, but the actual building is for sale. And John, who I'd known a very long time, had been a student at Yarmouth as well, and I think that started a kind of conversation, I guess.
Yeah, we started talking about what happened to places like Yarmouth, and we'd both, for various reasons, sort of been visited lots of other towns to do talks and go to conferences and stuff like that, and we became interested in what happened to similar colleges in other towns, and it started to turn into a bit of a exploration of history of those institutions, and there started to be certain patterns emerging, I suppose, about kind of closures and amalgamations and repurposings.
But I think to start with, there was some curiosity, but there was no sense or intention that this is going to be anything more than, something that's a bit of idle curiosity in a way. And then I think over time, over a couple of years really, we started to realise this was quite a sort of almost like a national phenomenon that had happened. And then we thought, well, what is it all adding up to? What is it? What is there something? Is there any record of these buildings and what they were and what happened to them? I guess the next stage was that we put together some of the photos and thoughts, and we started doing a few talks about the project. People seemed to be interested, and one of the things that came out of those talks was people wanted to share their stories. A lot of people had stories about their experience and what they'd studied, or where they'd studied, or where they'd taught. For me, I think I became really interested in the visual, how it looked, because I wanted the pictures. I mean, you could do these with very, very quickly, just snap each picture and, do the whole lot in a couple of weeks. But I really wanted to bring some kind of sense of dignity, I guess, and some sense of the fact that we were treating these with real respect, especially where the building itself was almost derelict. And also for something that would be interesting to see in an art institute, in an art context. So there's lots of kind of decisions that we had to make then. I mean, one of the big decisions was what happens when the art school building is no longer there. It's been erased, it's been demolished. What do you do? I mean, and we said, well, we're just going to photograph what is there, which creates these kind of strange punctuation points, I think, in the show, where you suddenly come to a point where there's just a car park, or there's clearly a relatively new building. And you get a sense of some of these buildings are totally lost now. They are permanently gone, totally erased.
I suppose the other thing that made it plausible as an exhibition is that by that point we'd gathered enough information to figure out that certainly in the 1950s, 60s, there were over 150 art schools in the UK, and so there were a lot of buildings, a lot of towns, and so we started to think about this as not at that point as a national picture, but we started to think about how would you gather that information and what would you do with it. And it became obvious, especially when we were talking to Brian about the Blue Coat, that it was really interesting to think about this as a sort of set of regional histories about the relationship between art education and local industries, and sort of the different histories of different parts of the country, and how the art school system sort of fitted into that. And so by the time we were thinking about working at the Blue Coat, it had become, at that point, a sort of a project that was thinking about regional identities, local communities.
And also, it was manageable at that scale. If you do a region, that's sort of a manageable. When the national picture for us was too big, it was over. It's just like, this is too much. So, and also that in a way established a model where we were keen to work with regional partners, you know, whether it was the New Art Gallery in Walsall or the Blue Coat or in Rochdale or wherever. So we'd have a kind of base in that space, in that place. And also, you know, the other factor about it was that the exhibitions actually were created a point for information. I mean, we learned more about the region by doing the exhibition there because people came and talked to us about it. And that for us was very interesting as a site. So the work and the gallery became a site of production as much as just a presentation of what we'd done. And also, I think the final thing for me is that this is about contemporary Britain now. These are not nostalgic images. These are all relatively recent. These are all places that exist in the world now. And it's interesting to see that there's a car park instead of an art school, or that there's an art school that's a tattoo parlour, or whatever it might be. I mean, I think that tells us something about the world we now live in. Or, you know, one of the ones that is where there was an art school, there's now a betting shop. You know, it gives a sense of how buildings and sites and cultures, city centres have changed.